Hi, I'm Ante Jeroncic, and this is Artis Vivendi, The Craft of Living. Last time I mentioned how all of the episodes on the channel are now available as podcasts on iTunes and Spotify, and I'm super excited about that because I know that many people prefer audio versions over video versions, so that is very, very nice. Another thing is, I wanted to remind all of you that the overarching theme of this podcast is the craft of living. And so everything that I do and whatever approach I have, whatever theme I'm dealing with really flows towards the two central questions. What is happiness, or what is the good life? What is human flourishing? So that is kind of the central theme. How do we describe a purposeful and meaningful existence? And then on the second hand, it is the question of practices. How do we actually live out such a life? And so if some of my episodes or all of the episodes seem to be all over the place, I mean, how is he moving from discussing Kierkegaard to sharing his identity values? Well, you have to keep in mind that that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to get a handle on these questions, approach them from these different perspectives. And so I think that is important to know. It's a one way perhaps in which I can organize, and I am organizing these different approaches. I provide different playlists, and some of them will be a little bit more theoretical or quote unquote intellectual, in the sense that I'm dealing with specific thinkers, philosophers, theologians, Christians, non-Christians, from different wisdom traditions. And that might be, some people really enjoy that. Other episodes will be more practical, where I share some tools and strategies. I will also in the future hopefully answer some specific questions that people are asking. And so again, these are all different ways of getting a traction on my primary interest behind this channel. But it might be a good thing to kind of organize them, and that's what I'm doing. And so you can see the different playlists that reflect that. Another thing that I mentioned in my update last week is that I'm quite eager to have interviews. Now, I don't think that at this moment I am able to do this in a video format. I really don't want to record things over, Zoom or some other technologies. I don't have a proper studio. I don't have a proper camera setup, and we live in kind of the COVID situation. But what I can do and what I want to do is to create podcast episodes of interviews. So that is really my goal. That is not going to happen all the time. That's not the primary shape of this channel. But I have some ideas and I have some potential people lined up, at least in my mind. I have still to approach them and see if I can have a little bit more of that, again, in an audio format and as a podcast. Okay, so this is something I wanted to share with you, a couple of items for you to keep in mind. And so now let us turn to our topic. During my last episode, I spent some time outlining my 10 essential identity values. I hope that I made it clear that a lot of them have an aspirational quality to them. I do not pretend that I am a perfect embodiment of any of those 10 values, but that's exactly the point, right? It's precisely because I feel that I need to grow, and I hope to grow until the end of my life, that I have to be mindful of the areas in which I need to change and need to develop and need to be, quite frankly, transformed, sometimes even radically. So, and I also made clear that I was mostly just listing them. I didn't have time to expand on the various aspects of those identity values, the different influences that flow into them. And by influences, I mean schools of thought and thinkers, experiences, moral exemplars, or role model that I've encountered in my life. So I was not able to do that, and I hope to be able to do that in the future. That's quite exciting. I also offered, you might recall, some practical suggestions how actually I am taking these widely important things, these essential things, how I try to leverage them through my practices of planning and creating hierarchies. And again, I hope to have another episode, and I will do it through Zoom or something like this. It won't be a good quality, but I actually want to show you how I have set things up in Evernote and how I'm trying to bear these goals to bear upon life. Because that is the problem, right? Most of us, we have these ideals or these ideas, and yet they somehow linger. We are very excited about them, but then we forget about them or have no way of actually incorporating them into the system that includes decision making, goal setting, and so on and so forth. I hope really to dwell on that a bit more in the future. So that's very exciting. But today I would like to talk about and share a little bit about things that I have learned over the years when it comes to these values. And this is really the motive behind what I'm going to share. Let me share the motive behind what I'm going to share now. I have this good friend of mine, I think I mentioned him. A good friend is perhaps an acquaintance, a former student with whom I feel really closely connected, even though we don't spend much time, sadly, not enough time. But when we do meet, sometimes we sit down, we go to our local, baguette de France, take some sandwich. That was pre-COVID, right? And we would just talk about life, talk about insights, talk about things we've learned. And I feel always inspired as a result of such conversations. And there is a question that he asked me a number of times in one format or another. So he asked me the question, or he asks me the question, what would you have done differently, right, if you were younger? Or what mistakes did you make? Or what advice would you give to your younger self? And those kind of questions, I find them very important and very significant. And they would linger with me, and I would try to answer them in my mind. It's very difficult for me to answer them on the spot because they require some introspection and some reflection. But I think they're very important questions because they show us what we have learned and things that we would have done differently and things that we might perhaps offer as an advice. Now, I know that people are very reticent and very squeamish at taking advice from others. I get that. I was like that, and that's why we need to fail. That's why we have to discover it on our own. But I thought perhaps to share a few insights. I won't be sharing all of them. I have a whole list here, things that I learned along the way and things I wish I'd known earlier in my life. I am absolutely convinced that in some significant aspects, my life would have turned out differently had I remembered them and had I kept those insights in mind. I have them in front of me. That's why I have this iPad, because I need to depend on my notes a little bit here. So here's the first thing that I've learned. I've learned that there are actually a handful of key insights when it comes to the question of eudaimonia, or the question of living well, of flourishing, of a good life, that are getting rehashed and restated for a few millennia now. And they appear in different wisdom traditions, including scriptures and philosophers, in poetry and literature. They are being restated and they're being sort of repurposed for different contexts. As a matter of fact, I would make the claim, and I'm not sure that is correct. It just popped into my mind actually just yesterday or even this morning. And that is that when it comes to wisdom, when it comes to living well, I don't think that many new things have been discovered in the last 2,000 years, let's say. Right? I believe that all the fundamental insights about the good life have been with us for millennia. Now, I'm not saying that those insights have not been refined, and very often we actually find empirical verification, sociology, social psychology, even economics, anthropology, all these various disciplines, they kind of flesh out these fundamental insights. But I believe that most of the core ones have been with us for a very long time. So if you think about like what is really new, what we have learned in the last couple hundred years, right? I would say perhaps one thing now, I'm thinking of one thing, for instance, like the Freudian unconscious and the way that is being again kind of recast and readapted as either adaptive unconscious or different ways in which psychology nowadays talks about that aspect of affective automaticity and automaticity of being in general. But that might be new. I don't think that anyone in the past had such a clear insight about the unconscious and how we are doing with these precognitive convictions, desires, affects. So perhaps that is new. And we can add some additional things, but most of the things have been with us for a very long time. And that being the case, a lot of these insights, they will inevitably strike us as familiar, and they smack of cliches. Most of them, you can put them on a cup, you can put them as a bumper sticker, and we encounter them very often in very sort of trivial literature, feel-good literature, productivity literature, self-help literature. It's kind of being rehashed over and over and over. Now you have these excellent sort of personalities, new people coming along. They are sleek, they are smart, they write new books, they know how to present and know how to talk. But actually, when you dissect what they're saying, like very little of that is new, right? So for me, that is kind of an insight. And precisely because there's a danger that these things are overfamiliar. Actually, the danger lies in the fact that they are overfamiliar because we don't take them seriously, right? Because we think that they are, it's just they're too superficial and too simple. In any case, so I think that is one of the insights that we have, that they've arrived at, right? Very often, until the things that you disregard, things that sound too cliche, too simple, those might actually be the source of revolutionary insights, that if you were to put them into life, you would be a completely different person. I used to be into herbs quite a bit, into medicinal herbs. I like to read about them. I like to make medicinal teas and all of this, different kind of teas, medicinal teas. And what I was always really interested is how plants that we treat as weeds, that we step on them, we try to get rid of them, how they actually have very significant and potent medicinal properties. So these weeds that we disregard and hate and would never put them into a vase and cherish them, they're actually extremely healthy. It seems to me that a lot of these life insights that we encounter are almost like these weeds. Another thing that I've learned, I don't want to start with every point, another thing that I've learned, but okay, here it is. Like, another thing that I've learned is this notion of the power of serendipity, and that is why I took that particular angle to talk about Augustine. You might remember that some of you have listened to this episode, to the episode on the power of serendipity, what I've learned from Augustine. And there was a reason why I talked about this, because I firmly believe that there is a power, right? There is the power of grace, the power of serendipity, the power of providence that seeks to bring wholeness into our lives. I cannot recall now if I referred to M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled, but in the book, he talks quite a bit about the power of serendipity and how he defines that as grace, and how that power seems to be working in our lives in ways that we don't even understand. By all accounts, we should be eaten alive by bacteria, and yet we still manage to live and flourish and exist. And there is a huge degree of wonder to that once you start thinking about this. And that power, serendipity, tries to bring insight to our lives. So I always am very much interested in these change moments or transformation moments, when things click in people's minds, things that they have heard so many times and they disregarded them, be it in terms of health, be it in terms of priorities, or perhaps even addictions or life values, whatever it is. And suddenly one day, out of nowhere, for no particular reason, boom, there's the awakening. And that is, for me, absolutely amazing. Like a guy or a girl who looks at herself in the mirror and doesn't like the way he or she looks because perhaps there are too many pounds there, perhaps even dealing with obesity issues. And the person sees himself or herself 100,000 times and nothing happens. And then one day, something clicks and they order, I don't know, like whatever, some of P90X or whatever, some of these older programs or whatever exercise craze we have right now at the moment, insanity, whatever there is out there. And slowly, and then they start recording themselves. And after like a year, you see this shredded person. But that is a miracle in itself, like how people are willing to achieve such a transformation. But for me, what is really miraculous is this click. And I think we need to be open to such moments. We need to wake up every morning with the expectation, today might be the day when I will have that click in my mind. Today. And every day, wake up with that sense of expectation. Today, perhaps today, what I have always wanted to change, the life that I always wanted to live differently, perhaps today is the day. And having that element of hope and that sense of expectation, being alert to when these moments take place, that is incredibly important. Obviously, choices really matter, especially when such moments come. As James Clear says in his book Atomic Habits, every time you act, you are casting a vote for the kind of person you want to become. Every time you act, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you want to become. And nothing happens overnight. As Jocko Willink once noted, and you don't need to quote Jocko Willink, that is kind of obvious, but I got it from him. He said, Rome was not built in a day, was not built overnight. It took many, many years. It took centuries. And it did not fall apart overnight. It took a long time of violence and decadence for that to actually materialize. And so it is with our lives. Right? Change does not happen overnight. Decisions can happen overnight, but changes take a time, for better or for worse. And that is so true. And I wish if I could share something like Jocko mentioned, and I fully agree with that, like Jocko made that statement, that if he could share something with young people, it would be this idea that there are really no insignificant choices. Choices really, really matter, right? These tiny decisions, these tiny shortcuts, these moments where you're just cutting corners or making choices that seem to be so small, they send you on a trajectory that at the end might really be tragic. I'm thinking of people in my elementary school, people who were good students, guys who were good students, but then started, found some friends, started doing some things. Some of them ended in prison. One of them was killed. And we were all kind of the same in 5th, 6th grade, 7th grade. And then things started to change. So that is an important idea, right? Now, while I'm at Jocko Willink, I have to mention his famous statement, and that is that discipline equals freedom. I actually have a t-shirt. It would have been a little bit corny for me to have the t-shirt. A student gave it to me once because I would share Jocko Willink in my classes from time to time. Discipline equals freedom. If you get that as a young guy and as a young girl early on in life, but even later on, right? You don't have to be young. You can get this even later. If you understand that discipline equals freedom, you have arrived at a revolutionary insight. It is a discipline of practice of a piano that enables you to play it freely. It is the discipline of getting up and running regularly that gives you the freedom to run a marathon. And you can go through various domains of life, and that absolutely is true. In the spiritual domain, the discipline of having time for meditation, reflection, and reading scriptures if you are a Christian, or some other literature if you're not, you do that regularly, the discipline, it will result in a changed state of mind and heart, which will give you the freedom to be less reactive. I mean, that insight, that discipline equals freedom, is really a key insight that I would share to my younger self. I would also share to the younger Ante that have a craftsmanship attitude to everything. That means time, patience, humility, understanding of processes and the importance of repetition. Many people have written about the centrality of deliberate practice and how all of that works. And I will actually provide perhaps a link or two in the description where you can read on that. But deliberate practice, this notion that you actually, not just any practice, but practice or exercises that will focus on certain elements of the skill that you try to acquire. So in the piano, you practice scales. In running, you do dashes. In swimming, you're working your technique, where you try to have buoyancy and not to, for your feet not to fall down, so you can. Anyway, so these different elements of swimming technique, you work on them. In themselves, these things are not meaningful. Right? The purpose is not to play scales. The purpose is not to swim on the side and develop the kind of sense of pressure on the torso where you have a proper alignment in the water. That's not the point. The point is to swim. But focusing on these things repeatedly actually brings about great results. And the same is with writing, regular writing, every day. If you're a writer, your minimum amount of words that you write, and you're getting better and better and better and honing that skill. And that, I really believe that is incredibly important. But we cannot change our lives completely. This idea of New Year's resolution, where you have this long list that covers like everything, all the aspects of your life, and you're now going to be a new person by virtue of having written out those things, well, that's not going to happen. These things don't happen that way. So, because it's just human nature cannot handle all of those multiple choices at one time. So it's always good to focus on one thing, or on two things in different domains of life. In health and wholeness, in relationships, in work, you work on one thing. I remember listening, I don't know where I heard this. I was trying to remember, I just don't know where. But it was an example, and I'm paraphrasing now, but it was an example of an obese person who had really problems with diabetes and was already losing his sight, eating incredibly unhealthy. And so he comes to, I don't know who this person was, a doctor or a counselor, a psychologist, I forgot now. It doesn't really matter, but the person tells him, okay, tell me, what are you eating what are you drinking, what are you doing every day? And the guy was drinking just a lot of Coke, Pepsi actually. And then the doctor or this counselor tells him, okay, so this is what I want you to do. I want you to only drink now diet Pepsi, which of course is not healthy, right? But it reduces a little bit of sugar in any case. Oh no, I cannot. This is very sort of, horrible taste. Okay, can you try to, at least for this week, try just diet Pepsi. And you can notice that she didn't tell him to eat, veggies, kale, become a vegan, whatever, right? It was just a minor thing that was within his power. So he comes back next week. Did you do it? Yes, I did it. And already repeating that a couple of times gave him a sense of agency. He realized that he has the freedom to make those kind of choices. And then, I don't know, she told him to eat one banana and slowly these incremental choices. And so one day he is walking home and sees someone is selling like a cheap stationary bike. He gets it, puts it into his living room and is biking now in the evening while he's watching TV. And so one day he looks at the TV and suddenly he realizes that his vision is not blurry anymore. He can actually see the TV. So see how slowly the change came about. He was able to mitigate the adverse effects of diabetes and actually reverse some of that. And so these small incremental changes, I think it's important to have in life. Be realistic. But what you do is, and this is Nir Eyal has this notion, and I will provide a link for that, of progressive extremism. Right? So you decide there's one thing area in your life where you want to make a change. Like let's say you realize that in your house, you will not drink soda anymore. And he does it much better than I do, but let me just paraphrase it and then you can watch it. So, I will, from now on, I am not drinking soda in my home anymore, right? If I'm outside, I can drink it, but not in my home. And from now on, never, ever again, I am that kind of a person who will never, ever, for the rest of my life, drink soda in my home, right? And then I think he has his example, then he talks about some sweets. I forgot what he's talking about. Okay, then I won't be drinking soda at all. Or okay, I'm eating sweets, but I won't be, let's say, I won't be eating, let's say Oreos are a problem for me. So I won't be eating Oreos for the rest of my life. I can eat cheesecake and all of this, but this one thing, never, ever again. And this is what he means by progressive extremism. And he tells of his story where he essentially became sugar-free over a period of time. And so this is then connected to this notion that acquiring these habits becomes your identity. It's not so much that you just don't eat or don't drink soda anymore. No, you're simply the kind of person who doesn't do that. It is your part of your identity, and that is something that James Clear also makes, no pun intended, clear in his Atomic Habits. So I think that is quite important. And so it is important to understand the function of mini habits, like these small things that you know that you can always do them. And James Clear also writes about it, right? So what is this simple ritual, the mini habit that you can do even when things are the craziest in your life? You cannot, except perhaps illness, but you cannot claim business. You cannot claim family issues. You cannot claim travel, perhaps. Like, what is the one thing that you can always do when it comes, let's say, to exercise, right? So I think that every day, however tough my life is, I can do 5 minutes of push-ups and sit-ups. Let's say that. That's it. I cannot imagine any kind of life except illness, where you and I cannot do 5 minutes of exercise like that. Right? You can do more, but never less than 5 minutes. And so you see, you try to have these mini habits that are sort of, they don't cause friction in your life. They're easy to do. You don't have to go to a special gym. You don't have to allocate 2 hours. You don't have to be sort of free from work requirements. No. You can always do that. And then you start building in the various domains of life these mini habits. This is what I tell my graduate students when it comes to writing. Like what is the amount of writing on your dissertation, on your papers, that you can do every single day? You cannot think of an excuse. You cannot think of a circumstance of anything in your life happening that would prevent you to sit down and write for 10 minutes. Now, the trick, of course, is then once you start exercising 5 minutes, that turns into 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And that's fine, right? But be very careful not to turn that extended now period into a mini habit, because that mini habit then becomes unwieldy or unrealizable in circumstances and situations when life becomes crazy. I really realize this. And this connects me to this idea of keynote habits. Keystone habit, not keynote, keystone habits. Keynote is something different. Keystone habits. And I've got this from, I believe Charles Duhigg writes about them. These habits that you put into your life, and they have a tremendous ripple effect. For some people, just unplugging 2 hours before bedtime and getting 8 hours of sleep, that is a keystone habit that will have ripple effects. Times of meditation and reflection, prayer, these are keystone habits. But what is really interesting that sometimes really very small things in your life can have the effect of a keystone habit. I remember one time I was in taking a shower, I had this shampoo, and I realized the moment when I put the shampoo not in the place where it was supposed to be, but a place that was kind of easier to reach. I didn't want to extend my arm. And I started laughing because I realized the micro impulse of laziness there. I took the shortcut. And I started laughing, and then that realization actually made me go through the day or become aware of these shortcuts that I was taking, these micro lazy impulses, or micro impulses of laziness would be a better way to put it. And once I was on the hunt for those, I just couldn't believe how many things like that were taking place in my life. And once I started paying attention to them, like in all other dimensions of life, I started feeling change. And I developed the rule, the +1 rule that I have, which is in any situation that I find myself in, be it brushing my teeth, preparing for lectures, any cleaning, chores, like what is the one thing in this situation that I'd rather not be doing? And then, okay, so let me do it. Then I do it. Always going this kind of extra step, fighting these impulses of sort of the shortcuts and quite frankly, laziness that is embedded in human nature. So that for me was a keystone habit that had a profound effect on, as I mentioned, various domains of life. So I would say that, and perhaps I can end here and then pick this up next time in some other episode. What James Clear, again in his book Atomic Habits, refers to the aggregation of marginal gains. This kind of 1% improvement. Forget about turning around your life. I wish I'd known this. But you tweak, you work on the system, you add something, you do something better. You have a better software, you have a better schedule. You allocate a bit more time for your weekly sort of reflection and reviews. You do a little bit here and a little bit there. And it is this aggregation of marginal gains. And here's a wonderful story of the UK cycling team and how they did a lot of these changes and then ended up harvesting a lot of gold medals in the Olympics. I believe it was London Olympics, but I'm not quite sure, but you can kind of find that. The illustration that he shares, that he has a number of speeches, talks that he gives where he's outlining and referring to that example. So these are some of the things that I wish I'd known before in my life. If someone asked me, hey, tell me, what did you learn in the last 10 years, in the last 20 years? Things you wish you'd known before, things you'd wish the younger Ante was aware. It would have been these things, but not just knowing about them, because most likely I actually knew them theoretically, but I had no way of implementing them. I didn't have any kind of mechanism or intentionality to make them a regular part of my life. In any case, I believe that is something that I would share. Okay, so this is another sort of practical episode, life experiences episode, and I hope that there was at least one point, like one nugget that you found relevant and important. The list goes on. I'm about halfway through, and so I hope to pick this up next time, kind of part 2 of my whatever key life insights, if that's how I named it in my Evernote. So thank you so much for listening. I wish you all the best. Stay safe, be courageous, and live well until next time.